how would it continue to go with the kingdoms of Israel and Judah? How would they end up? When we last saw at the end of the first book of Kings, we were in the days of Elijah and Ahaziah, king of Israel, around the year 850 or so. What would happen after these things? That's what we're going to find out as we consider the book we call the second book of Kings. Again, the Greek Septuagint probably has a better understanding for us, calling it Fourth Reigns, because what we call Second Kings is really the fourth in the series, from 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, and 2 Kings, detailing the story of when Israel has kings, or Israel and Judah has kings, the prophetic word to the main prophets, speaking to those kings, and the events of those kings' reigns. 2 Kings takes us from the days of Ahaziah and Elijah around the year 850 until the demise of the kingdom of Judah and the elevation of Jehoiakim, formerly king of Judah, in the days of Amel Marduk around the year 562 BC. So it's about a 300-year period of history that is being covered in this book. There's a lot going on here. We believe it is composed in its final form by an inspired prophet. We do not know his name. We believe he's inspired. He's taking all of these chronicles that probably existed about the kings of Israel and Judah, written probably contemporaneously or soon after the events from 850 to his own day, and writing them down. It could be done as quickly as toward the end of the exile, or it's being done in the immediate post-exilic period. And when you see the way this narrative is put together, it becomes painfully evident why it's put together the way it is. It's explaining the history, right? Telling the story of God working through the prophets, speaking to the kings, but ultimately it's explaining the demise of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah on account of their idolatry. So to understand the book of 2 Kings, we have to understand its primary phases. The first two chapters are really kind of just a continuation of what had been going on in the book of 1 Kings. You can make a good argument that maybe 2 Kings should really start with 2 Kings chapter 2, not where it is. Because 2 Kings 1 and 2, you still have Elijah still on earth. He prophesies doom for Ahaziah because Ahaziah has proven faithless. He's the king of Israel at this time. He wants to go seek insight from Beelzebul of Ekron and not from Elijah or from the God they have there in Israel. Ahaziah dies. Elijah then is taken up. He is translated. He does not die. Fiery chariots come down, grab him in Elisha's side, and he departs. And Elisha gets a double portion, of the spirit of Elijah upon him. And the first part of 2 Kings, really the first half of 2 Kings, is really it's the story of Elisha. It's the story of Elisha and his working with the kings of Israel and sometimes the king of Judah, but also the fulfillment of all that God had spoken to Elijah at Mount Sinai in 1 Kings chapter 19. And so we have a lot of stories in 2 Kings chapters 3 and 4 and 5, 6, 7, 8. Many of these stories try to demonstrate the great power of Elisha. So we see the way that he interacts with the sons of the prophets, and he's able to make water turn clean, to heal a stew that has poison in it. Of course, the famous story, a couple of the kids of Bethel start making fun of him because he's bald-headed. Elisha invokes a curse and bears come out and ravage those children. The 2 Kings 3 story about the going against King Misha of Moab. A lot going on there. In fact, we have Misha's way of looking at the story as well. And then we have to then kind of try to make sense of it, where God does give great victory of Israel and their coalition against the Moabites. But in the end, Misha is still king, and Misha is still in rebellion against the Israelites after this moment and able to set up his own monument attesting to the victory that he had received. You see the story of Elisha helping a widow and ultimately raising the child back from the dead of this widow. Of a Shunammite woman later. So you have the same kind of things going on that Elijah is able to do, multiplying oil to preserve a family, bringing back the dead of a woman who hadn't had children and gave birth to a child. You're seeing the great power at work within him. In chapter 5, very famously, Elisha heals Naaman, the Aramean general, He's got leprosy or some kind of skin disease. He comes to Elisha, who tells him just go dip in the Jordan 7 times. He's offended by this. There's better rivers in the land of Aram, which there probably are. His servants say, look, you'd have done a mighty thing. He asked you to do the stupid little thing. So he goes and dips in the Jordan. He is cleansed. And he wants dirt so he can serve Yahweh well, but also gets a kind of a pass when he has to bow before Ramon when he's with the king because he's the Aramean general. Very interesting stuff going on in chapter 5. In chapter 6, we have a powerful story where Elisha keeps telling the king of Israel or the king of Aram is going to go fight, and all of a sudden the king of Aram sends his army against Elisha himself. Elisha's servant freaks out. Elisha says there's more for us than there are for them. He asks God to open the eyes of servant, and the servant over sees all of this angelic host, fiery chariots, chariots of fire there in front of him. And he gets the clue, right? He sees, and Elisha has a great victory there. And we see these stories being told throughout. And then we get really important things going on in chapter 8 and following. So all these stories have been great. They've been really reinforcing how God is powerful work through Elisha. You see some of the times where Elisha is engaging with kings of Israel. You even see kings of Israel wanting to hear stories of what God had done through Elisha. You got the really powerful stuff. But when it comes to moving the narrative along for us, it's really in chapter 8, where Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, is sick, and his servant Hazael is sent to see Elisha. And Elisha sees him and weeps, knowing what he's going to do to Israel. And the message is sent, you can tell him he's going to live, but he's going to die. And Hazael is the one who kills him, and Hazael is then made king over Aram, just as had been prophesied in the days when Elijah spoke before God at Sinai. And then we see that Jehoram is king in Judah, and then he dies, and his son Ahaziah becomes king. I know we had Ahaziah of Israel, now we have the Ahaziah of Judah. When Ahaziah is now king here of Judah, Jehoram or Joram, we call him Joram so we don't confuse ourselves, because we had a Jehoram of Judah, now we have Joram of Israel, are both there. They've been fighting as Hazael the Aramean, and they've both been injured, right? They're both in trouble. And Jehu comes he's the military guy, and Elisha sends a prophet to anoint him king of Israel. And then he told all those people, they said I'm king of Israel. And of course, these days, if somebody says you're king, you either have to go become king or you die. And so Jehu goes and he attacks and kills both Joram and Ahaziah in a chariot contest very quickly. They weren't expecting it. Interesting, Hazael, in an inscription we found that invalidates the existence of the house of David, said he was the one who killed them. We can kind of harmonize this by saying Hazael injured them and then Jehu finished them off. And thus they died. And now Jehu goes through all the processes that was prophesied that would take place. He has Jezebel killed. Actually, he asks who's on his side, and the eunuchs knock Jezebel over, and the dogs eat her flesh, as had been prophesied. Jehu then wipes out Ahab's family. Then Jehu puts on a ruse. Ahab worshipped Baal little, I'm going to worship him much. Collects all the Israelites together, who serve Baal. All these Baal worshippers are together. All the ones who don't serve Yahweh are kept out, and he has that place stormed. All the Baal worshippers are killed. The pillars are knocked down. The temple is burned, and the statement is made, Jehu eradicated Baal worship from Israel. So everything that had been so difficult to imagine only a couple generations earlier in the days of Elijah, right? Elisha's still alive. Elisha's seeing all of this. It's not that long in terms of a turn of time. But it's now happened, where Elijah felt like there was no hope of getting rid of Baal service and for dedicated service to Yahweh. Now the time has come where Elisha is prophet, Hazael is king of Aram, Jehu is king of Israel, and Baal worship was eradicated from Israel. But Jehu kept serving at the two temples, and so God promised, you are going to get another 4 generations on the throne, and that will be it. And of course, the rest of his descendants are going to have this kind of back and forth going on with Hazael. Hazael will defeat many of them and encroach onto the land of Israel, but ultimately Israel is able to reestablish its territorial integrity. And the days of Jeroboam II, which we'll get to in a moment here in 775, 750, it's autumn in Israel. Everything seems to be going well. But this is when the author then pivots back to Judah, because Ahaziah died, so did a lot of Ahaziah's family, but Athaliah is still there, and she tries to wipe out the Davidic family. but she doesn't get them all, because Jehoshaphat saves Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and keeps him in the temple. And when he reaches 7, Jehoiada the priest brings out the army with him, claims him as king. Athaliah cries treason. She's killed. No one misses her because she was oppressive. No one liked her. And the Davidic monarchy maintains itself through Jehoash. Jehoash of Judah is faithful as long as Jehoiada is. He restores the temple in his days. He will later die of a conspiracy. And then you will have additional kings that are following through here. And this is the time where Elisha is going to die. You're at this point reaching the first half of the 8th century. And things are seeming like the way they always had been. There's no necessarily expectation of doom and gloom on the horizon. Everything is going as it has been. There's all this kind of going back and forth here. Amaziah was king of Judah. He defeated Edom, then thought he could defeat Israel. The Israelites came and just wiped him out in a lot of ways and took him captive. That didn't go well. Uzziah is then made king. He's a faithful king, but he got a little leprosy in his hands, and therefore was kind of set aside. And then there's the Jeroboam's reign, which is the last moment of great peace in Israel. And this is that period of time where Amos is prophesying, Hosea starts to prophesy, and there's this message of upcoming doom and gloom that Israelites couldn't imagine at the time. Assyria was weak for a moment. It had been as it had been, and especially in the historical narrative, it doesn't seem like you're going to have this huge transition or change. But when Jeroboam II dies around 753 BC, we now get the trajectory of the end of Israel. And you're going to have a series of a few kings. Zechariah, the son of Jeroboam, will reign shortly, and he'll be killed. Shalom kills him. He is killed by Menahem. Menahem is there for a little bit. He tries to buy off Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria at the expense of his nobles. He dies. His son Pekah is made king. He is overthrown by Pekah. Pekah is the one who sees the threat of Assyria acutely. He and Rezin, king of Aram, are the ones who conspire against Ahaz, who is now king of Jerusalem, and try to get rid of him and try to force Judah into an alliance with them against the Assyrian menace. And it's Ahaz who, against Isaiah's will, is going to go and become a vassal, subject himself to Tiglath-Pileser III of Assyria. And in so doing, he's going to cause problems for his son, but he accomplishes his purpose. And Tiglath-Pileser comes through and destroys Aram completely and takes out most of Israel, leaving a rump state in Israel. Hoshea will become king of it for 10 years, and then Shalmaneser and eventually Sennacherib come, and they finish it off. And that's the end of Israel. And so in 750, everything seemed to be normal. By 720, only 30 years later, their Arameans are gone, the Israelites are gone, those kingdoms are gone. Assyria has taken over their land. Judah is all that's left. And in chapter 17 of 2 Kings, the king's author is going to step out and explain this happened because of their idolatry. It happened because they served Yahweh inappropriately, these two, Dan and Bethel. It all was according to what the prophets had said. He talks about how the Israelites were exiled and Assyrians brought new people in who would become the Samaritans. Starting in chapter 18, now you have the story of the rest of the history of Judah. And Judah is going to persevere for a little while longer. We have the days of Hezekiah. And Hezekiah is this great king who wants to restore things and is spoken of so positively in the text. He's spoken of very positively in the text because he got rid of a lot of idolatry. He tried to centralize worship in Jerusalem at the temple. His heart is right with God. He prays to God that he'll live longer. He lives longer. But you even see in the narrative, because you can't hide it, there's some problems. He rebels against Sennacherib, king of Syria. And Sennacherib comes in with his whole army, devastates all the land. He besieges Jerusalem. He threatens, all these things. And he gloats and says, Yahweh can't save you. The other gods didn't save their people. And of course, Yahweh does save his people. And the angel of the Lord strikes down his army, and Sennacherib limps home to Assyria and is eventually killed by his children. Ominously, Hezekiah welcomes in Babylonian envoys and messengers because he's kind of allied with Babylon against Assyria and shows them everything. And Isaiah says that the Babylonians are going to take all of that. And we see how that's going to happen. Hezekiah's son Manasseh is incredibly wicked and brings a lot of the service of foreign gods into the temple in ways that made God very angry. And it's in his day that God actually makes a decree that Jerusalem would be destroyed and that there was going to be this disruption. he lives a long time. His son Ammon is taken out in a conspiracy after only a couple of years. He's also wicked. And Ammon's young son Josiah is then put on the throne. And Josiah, beginning in chapter 22, is seen as this great king. He restores the temple. He, again, goes after all this idolatry. They find the book of the law in the temple. It's read to him. He tears his garments, realizes how much his family and people before him have sinned. And the prophet Huldah basically confirms that, but says that he would be spared. And he goes and takes over and establishes his strength in the former land of Israel, because the Assyrians are weakening at this moment, and destroys the temples of Dan and Bethel, kills their priests on the altar. Everything prophesied in 1 Kings 13 takes place. But Josiah makes a bad decision, tries to fight against Necho, a pharaoh of Egypt, to kind of help prop up the Babylonians. He's killed in that battle. They make Jehoahaz his son king. Necho comes through and actually makes Jehoiakim king. Jehoiakim's not a great guy. He's induced by the Egyptians to rebel. Nebuchadnezzar brings his forces. We don't know if Jehoiakim's killed in or just dies naturally at that time, but right at the time Jehoiakim, his son, becomes king, he has to sell the Babylonians. He goes into exile with his family. Almost all the elite goes with him. The middle and upper classes go in exile. This is when Ezekiel gets exiled in 597 BC, leaving a rump state of Judah that Zedekiah is in charge of. And Zedekiah will later also be induced by the Egyptians to rebel. And the Babylonians come back. They besiege the town. This time, they besiege it to the end. They breach the walls. Zedekiah tries to run. He is captured. He is blinded. His sons are killed in front of him. The temple is destroyed. The city is razed to the ground. For a moment afterward, there's some Israelites in the land. They flee once Gedaliah is killed, and thus Judah is exiled from its land. And the book ends in a sad statement where Jehoiakim of Judah is taken out of prison and brought to Amel-Marduk's table in 562. And that's how the book ends. Kind of a sad coda, maybe hoping for some kind of Davidic restoration, which would take place, but not in the way that they would have imagined. Thus we see 2 Kings. And you see for the first half, everything seems to be going on as normal, but then all of a sudden the Assyrian giant arises, and there goes Israel and Aram. Judah is massively compromised, and ultimately Babylon comes through and destroys it all. And it's all understood because they had not proven faithful to God. They had enmeshed themselves in all of these things, and thus came the end as a warning to Israelites later to not walk in their ways. If you have any questions or comments or thoughts about 2 Kings, we'd love to hear about them. Please let us know in the comments and continue our conversation. I'm Ethan with the Adventist Church of Christ. We would love to be of some kind of encouragement service to you. If we can study the Bible with you, if we can pray for you, if you'd like to meet with us, let us know. Please reach out to us at AdventistChurchOfChrist.org or on social media at Adventist Church or Adventist Church of Christ. We again thank you. May the Lord bless and keep you and make his face to shine upon you until we're able to meet again.